Zambia is a viable multi-party democracy with a distinct separation of powers among the three arms of government. These are the legislature, executive and judiciary. The executive branch is headed by the president and comprises the vice president and the ministers who are appointed to fill currently 23 positions. Ultimately, all of the powers of the executive branch rest with the president. On the other hand, the judicature is made up of the Supreme Court, the High Court, and any other lower courts that the legislature should deem necessary. The legislative power of Zambia vests in Parliament, which consists of the National Assembly and the President. There are 150 parliamentary constituencies where those aspiring to represent people as members of Parliament stand for election every 5 years. Each member represents one constituency. Overall, the total number of MPs in the Zambian Parliament is 158, including the 8 nominated and appointed by the President. Currently, the Patriotic Front PF has 87 seats. The Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, MMD, has 34 seats. United Party for National Development, UPND, has 33 seats. The Forum for Democracy and Development, FDD, and the Alliance for Democracy and Development each have 1 seat. The National Assembly, which consists of elected and nominated members of Parliament, is a key institution to Zambia's democracy, governance and development. It is an institution that carries out a wide range of important public responsibilities. These include making laws, acts of Parliament, approving proposals for taxation and public expenditure, and keeping the work of the government under scrutiny and review. In short, it offers checks and balances to the executive. As a body comprising people's representatives, Parliament keeps a watch over the performance of the executive to ensure that the implementation of public policy conforms to the approved developmental agenda of the state and expenditure incurred is in accordance with parliamentary authorization. The oversight role that Parliament exercises is done in various ways that include committees, questions to ministers, and motions. Parliament also exercises this power through the approval or otherwise of presidential nominees for appointment to various offices such as the Attorney General, Chief Justice, and many others. This is besides Parliament's representation of function, which is done through tools such as question time, statements, motions, debate on policy and bills, among others.
Indicate to me and the country at large the way they come up names of airports, schools, hospitals, looking at the veterans of this country.
Mr. Speaker, the naming of important sites in the country is done by government, but the request normally comes from the community.
A member of parliament has the opportunity to draw attention to developments or challenges in his constituency and explore avenues for socio-economic development of the constituency.
The people of Sesheke
Parliamentarians
and the user of Livingstone Sesheke Road are not happy with the works happening on the M10 road. Your Honor, any plan to give the people of Sesheke a quality and durable road with the introduction of the toffees? I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the works on the Sesheke Livingstone Road are underway, and the contractor is already on site or has been identified.
Parliamentarians carry out their duties at two levels, in Parliament in Lusaka and in the constituency. When it comes to administration, the Speaker is the presiding officer of the National Assembly, and his authority is recognized and respected by all members of Parliament. According to the Constitution of Zambia, the election of the Speaker is the first business that a new assembly transacts at its first meeting. The Speaker of the National Assembly is elected by members of the Assembly from among persons who are qualified to be elected as members of the Assembly but are not members of Parliament. During election of the Speaker, Deputy Speaker and Chairman of committees, the Clerk of the National Assembly is the presiding officer. Currently, Dr. Patrick Matibini is the one holding the position of Speaker of the National Assembly, and he was elected in 2011.
The whole idea of separation of powers is to ensure that the one group of persons do not exercise both, for instance, legislative functions as well as executive functions. And I think the risk that is presented whenever a certain group of persons belong to both the executive as well as the legislative branch is that it presents a challenge or a threat to the whole sense of separation of power, especially if the same persons who belong to the two branches, namely the executive and legislature, outnumber those who belong to the legislative branch of government. And this is little wonder that along our way in our constitutional development, there's been a school of thought that has advocated very, very vehemently that in fact, for instance, members of the cabinet should actually be appointed from outside Parliament.
The Speaker is assisted in discharging his duties by the Deputy Speaker and Deputy Chairperson of committees of the whole House.
Yeah, I believe that in terms of parliamentary democracy, the bedrock of parliamentary democracy is actually our committee system. And I must point out here that the committees are actually established or appointed through the Standing Orders Committee, which I'm privileged to chair. And these are multi-party composed committees. We make sure, and in fact we are required to ensure by the Constitution that the composition is equitable. And to that extent, and I'm proud to state that the composition is fairly representative. And because it is representative of all the political parties in Parliament, no single party can actually carry the day. And I think that we need to strengthen further that level of our parliamentary democracy. I also believe that whenever the legislative branch of government makes the executive branch of government accountable through the various systems of reporting. We have a committee system. I think it is important that responses from the executive branch of government are obtained in the shortest possible time, and more importantly, the recommendations that are made by Parliament are actually acted on. I think the members of Parliament are doing very sterling work in that regard, but I think it is important that the executive branch of government equally responds to these recommendations as expeditiously as possible. Further, I also think that there is need for more intersection between this branch of government, the legislative branch of government, with the civil society. We've tried over the period, this parliament and many other parliaments on the continent, to try and bring parliament closer to the people.
Mkondo Lungu is the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. And Mr. Lungu explains that the National Assembly has a wide range of important public responsibilities. Key among these duties is that of making laws.
The powers in the Constitution are contained in Part 5 of the Constitution, specifically referring to Article 62, which says the legislative power of Parliament rests, the legislative power of the country rests with Parliament. So that is where Parliament draws its authority from. And of course, it also makes a provision for Parliament to make its own rules. You see, sometimes we have our own rules here, as contained in the standing orders, the book 2005, and the other pamphlets here. The power to make our own rules as to how Parliament will conduct itself and so on also derives from the Constitution.
Mr. Lungu says as presiding officers, at times they face challenges in executing their duty in Parliament. One such challenge is interpreting the rules of procedure to members of Parliament.
So the challenge really is one of interpreting the rules of procedure. That's where, we have a handbook on what one can say, what one cannot say, and so on. And normally, for example, on points of order, members of Parliament are sensitized to say, you see, your point of order is only valid when it falls under any one of the question of the interpretation of the rules of procedure. Where rules of procedure are not adhered to, one can raise a point of is that member in order to not to follow the rules of the House. The question of decorum in the House, when somebody is debating, members of Parliament are supposed to listen and not to to undertake loud consultations, because that disturbs the person on the floor. So the question of decorum is very important. So these are the challenges that presiding officers face, because sometimes you have a member of Parliament who rises on a point of order, knowing that the point of order she is raising is not really within, it doesn't fall within the parameters as set out by Parliament. But these things happen. So as a presiding officer, you have to be very shrewd. You have to have a lot of wit, and your sense of judgment must be such that at any one point you should be able to give the interpretation as per the rules of procedure. Of course, we are human beings. I mean, presiding officers are also human beings. Sometimes you make a ruling, then you discover later on in yourself that maybe I should have done that way. But we don't tell them. Sometimes they will accuse presiding officers of being biased and so on. But that's the nature of the work that we presiding officers have to undertake.
The key main officers in the administration of Parliament are the Speaker and other two presiding officers, who are the Deputy Speaker and Deputy Chairperson of committees of the whole House. Others include the Vice President, who is the leader of government business in the House, and the whips, who are led by the government chief whip with his or her deputy. The whips help to bring order in the House.
So the whips manage and I shouldn't say control. They manage the members of the political party and they give them information on the issues which are going to be debated in the House. And also they give guidance on whether or not a political party will have a side to take on the issues which are being discussed in the House. So they play a role in managing also the discipline and conduct of members in the House by providing leadership to their own members from their political parties and also to the other members who are in the House.
The Zambian Parliament is a highly dignified place with strict adherence to rules of procedure. The Deputy Speaker explains that despite all this, members of Parliament are still allowed to pass light moments.
Of course, there are times when members of Parliament want to pass light moments, and you should be able to judge to say, oh, when the MP here is just trying to exercise a light moment, and then we all laugh about it. And just yesterday, latest, as an example of a light moment, one of the MPs, the right way of addressing the presiding officer when the House is sitting in committee. And of course, the question of impartiality. You see, when you are there, I am a member of the MMD, but once I'm in the chair, I don't look at myself as a member of the MMD. Honorable Banda is the FDD. So our responsibility as presiding officers to ensure that you exercise impartiality.
Since independence on the 24th of October 1964, Zambia has evolved through 11 parliaments. This makes the Zambian Parliament one of the oldest continuously functioning legislators in the Southern African sub-region. In this regard, the Zambian Parliament has enjoyed parliamentary democracy for 50 years. This could not have been made possible without the men and women who work tirelessly in the administration of Parliament. Doris Munga is a clerk of the National Assembly and she plays a major role at Parliament. She is the advisor to the Speaker, members of Parliament, the Executive, ministers and the President on matters which will come to Parliament for consideration and approval.
The clerk is also the controlling officer, meaning she or he is in charge of the money at Parliament, and she has to account for the spending of the money by the National Assembly. And the clerk is also the chief administrator. So in short, the clerk is the CEO of Parliament. And she also keeps the records of the proceedings of the House. So if you want to know what happened on Friday and what did Honorable Member so-and-so say, we keep a record, a verbatim record. So either you can read it or you can listen to it. Finally, I also, as clerk, have to look at all the bills, scrutinize them before the members of Parliament do it to see that they are admissible and that they are in a good state to be considered by the House. So whether they are coming from a minister or a member of Parliament in the backbench, they all have to pass through my office. The main officers of the House are the Speaker and the two presiding officers who assist him. One of them is the Deputy Speaker and the other one is the Deputy Chairperson of committees. The other main officers is the leader of government business, and normally this person is the Vice President. We also have the whips. who are led by the government chief whip, and then there's a deputy government chief whip, and at the moment there are 2 other whips. I have to explain how a political party in the House gets a whip. You must have 12 or more members. So if you are less than 12 members, you are in the House, but you're not represented by a whip. And then if your party has 53 or more members, you have a person called leader of the opposition. We had one after 2011 because the MMD had 53 members or more than 53. But afterwards their membership went below 53, so they no longer have a leader of the opposition. And the other officers are the clerk and the 2 deputy clerks, and then we have heads of department. And that's how Parliament is administered.
The growth of Zambia's democracy has been phenomenal, but one cannot talk about this growth without Parliament, which is one of Zambia's key governance institutions. As a way of enhancing democratic governance, the National Assembly of Zambia has undergone several reforms to realign its functions with the demands of plural politics. The introduction of parliamentary reforms was aimed at addressing some of the limitations which existed in the institution. Mr. Chifumu Banda is Deputy Chairperson of Committees of the whole House. He explains that the reform program was conceived in order to enhance parliamentary oversight of the activities of the executive and also to allow for increased participation of the citizens in the affairs of the country.
We have come up with a deliberate policy to create a special committee, which is called the Reforms and Modernization Committee, which is responsible for spearheading parliamentary reforms. You may be interested to know who sits on this committee. This is one of the few committees where you have honorable cabinet ministers sitting on the committee. We have the Minister of Finance sitting on this committee because most of the reforms which we come up with involve finances. So the Minister of Finance sits on the committee. We have the Minister of Local Government and Housing, sits on this committee. And then there is the Minister of Justice. Some of the reforms may call for changes to our laws, hence the need for the Minister of Justice to be on this committee. So this is the committee that is spearheading the reform program at Parliament. It may not be the only one, but we have other few programs, few committees, like the Program Steering Committee, which is composed of members of Parliament and cooperating partners. That's another group. The other one is Program Management Committee, which is composed of management staff and officers working in the PRP department. So all the 3 working together are working hand in glove to ensure that parliamentary reforms are implemented. So far, so good.
Over the years, the National Assembly has enacted several laws that have benefited the country. Mr. Banda cites some of the laws that have been passed.
Parliamentary reforms, by their nature, they mean reforms to the way Parliament is responding or going to respond as a result of certain changes that took place in our democratic dispensation. For your own information, and I hope you agree, that once upon a time we were operating under what is called a one-party participatory democracy, which in 1991 was transformed now into a into a multi-party democracy. So reforms had to be embarked upon in order to cater for the transition from one-partyism to multi-partyism. This is the reason why we had to embark on a long journey of parliamentary reforms.
In addition to relieving pressure on the House, the reforms were also intended to deal with specialized matters in the most efficient manner.
Parliamentary reforms involves a lot of activities. You will note, for example, that Parliament operates by and large through a system we call the committee system. We had to come up with reforms in the committee system. Once upon a time, members of the public could not access committee sittings. But because of the reforms and the need to bring Parliament closer to the people, we had to reform the way our committee system works. That is just one example. The other area of reform had to do with the legislative process. You know, one of the functions of Parliament or members of Parliament is to make laws. This is besides the oversight role as well as the representative role. Now, when it comes to making the law, we have stages through which a bill passes before it becomes law. Now, in our arrangement here, and through the reform process, once a bill has been presented to Parliament for first reading, the bill is referred to an appropriate committee of Parliament. And the reason for this is very simple. The bill is referred to a committee in order to allow for a detailed consideration of the bill. And at that point in time, members of the public, because of the reform program that we have implemented, are allowed to access committee hearings. In accessing committee hearings, we expect them to bring in ideas which are aimed at enriching the bill. Therefore, Parliament, through this facility, is brought closer to the people. Or is it the people being brought closer to Parliament?
The Deputy Chairperson of Committees of the whole House further explains that the National Assembly of Zambia is working hard to effectively perform the constitutional mandate in a manner that meets the aspirations of Zambians and contributes to national development. As a way of meeting this obligation, the National Assembly is currently constructing constituency offices across the country.
One achievement. It never used to happen before. Creation of constituency offices. All the 150 constituencies have got a constituency office. And Parliament has employed officers to man these constituency offices. These constituency offices have computers connected to internet. This is to facilitate easy communication between the constituents and the Member of Parliament. Constituents and Parliament. Quite an achievement too. Maybe you don't tune to Radio Parliament. If you don't, I can tune it on. It's on now. That is quite an achievement.
The current economic circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I thank you. Honourable Member from Pongwe.
And you know why it's an achievement? Because now members of the public can access proceedings of Parliament live. They can listen to their Member of Parliament contributing in Parliament. Yes, a lot has to be done, but suffice it to say that up to this stage, we have achieved a lot because all provincial centers in the country are covered by Radio Parliament. Even Muchinga district, now in Chinsali, you can tune in to parliamentary proceedings. So that is another achievement. Achievements are many, and I'll continue to tell you. Now, this is about Radio Parliament. You belong to the media. You know there is a media center around here. Aren't you aware of that? Part of the achievement of the Parliamentary Reforms Program. That is meant for you to have easy access to Parliament. We have parliamentary websites now. You enlightened people can easily access information on Parliament. You can access the order paper For you to know what is going on in Parliament on a certain day, access an order paper on the website. That's an achievement. Your Parliament is making itself accessible to you.
The goal of the administration of Parliament is to effectively support members of Parliament in the execution of their functions as lawmakers and people's representatives.